Great. Thank you everyone for joining us today for a public discussion session on the IAIS's issues paper on insurance sector operational resilience. I'm Ruby Gard. I'm from the IAIS Secretariat, and in that capacity, I act as the risk officer and I support our work on operational resilience. Before we start, I do have a few housekeeping items. To improve the audio quality, we recommend that you close all applications on your devices and that you don't need for the specific call. You'll see a symbol of a red microphone beside your name when you're muted. If you do not see that symbol, you're not muted, so please be cognizant of this. The entire session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on our website following the webinar, as will all of these presentation slides. In terms of the format of this session, we'll spend about the first half hour providing an overview of our issues paper, and we'll follow this by questions and answers, so hopefully you've saved up your questions. If you do have questions, please either raise your hand or you can type this into the chat box and I can read these out to everyone on your behalf. So with that, we can get started. I'm joined by the chair and vice chair of the Operational Resilience Task Force, which we refer to as the ORTF, Todd Kozlow, he's from the US Federal Reserve, and Elizabeth Gilbert from the Bank of England. Thank you both for being here with us. Alka, if we could move to slide 3. I'll just say a few words about background. Perfect, thank you. So today we'll provide an overview of our issues paper on insurance sector operational resilience, which we published last week on 23rd May. This paper was developed by the ORTF, which is a task force of the IAIS. It benefits from the input of our wide membership. So the IAIS has membership from over 200 jurisdictions, as well as insights gained through targeted stakeholder engagement and comments that we received from our public consultation period. From the public consultation, we received 7 comment letters and over 200 comments. These were mainly from industry associations as well as from IAIS members. All of the comments that we received and our responses are available on our website via our resolution for comments paper. So all of your comments were considered and we have our responses published on our website. So with that, I will hand it over to Todd, the chair of the ORTF. He'll provide an overview of the paper's objectives, as well as the scope and key inputs to the paper, followed by Elizabeth, who will go into greater depth on the core elements of the paper. We'll then speak to the comments we received, providing you a general summary, and finally, we'll say a few words on next steps. So with that, Todd, can I hand it over to you?
Sure, thanks, Ruby. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. I am Todd Kozlow. I'll start with the always obvious disclaimer that my comments are my own and not representative of the Federal Reserve. But we are here today to introduce the public discussion session to introduce the final paper, our issues paper on operational insurance sector operational resilience. We'll provide an overview of the comments received during the public consultation, and we'll touch a little bit on next steps for the ORTF. Go to the next slide, please. So the objective of the issues paper was to identify issues impacting operational resilience in the insurance sector and provide examples of how supervisors are approaching these developments. We wanted to also consider lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, since it was fresh in our minds and presented us with some interesting insight as we were developing this paper. The task force focused on 3 subtopics that it considered as areas of significant and increasing operational risk and therefore of immediate interest to supervisors. The first being cyber resilience, the second being third-party outsourcing, and the third being business continuity management, or BCM. While we have structured the paper so that the subtopics are addressed separately, we would like to emphasize that these risks should not be viewed in silo, as they are interdependent and interconnected. And in fact, what we found as a task force was that it was really difficult to talk about any one of these topics without jumping into issues associated with the 2 other. Which we hope is something that resonates with this audience. And the large umbrella that is operational resilience, there are many interrelated topics and risks underneath that need to be considered. We move to the next slide. So risks associated with operational resilience are increasing at an accelerating pace for a variety of reasons, as listed on the slide. And while the concept of operational resilience may not be new to insurers, there is a recognition of the importance to adapt supervisory regimes to account for the growing resilience of insurers on digital systems, the adoption and implementation of new technologies, and the use of third-party providers to provide critical services. And this was further highlighted during the pandemic, in which we all had to adapt quickly to new ways of working, including remote working, and the widespread use of technology to stay connected. And some of us are still remote working depending on our situations. And so next slide. Great. So to develop the issues paper, the task force undertook a few steps. One of the first things we did is we actually reviewed the IAIS Insurance Core Principles, or ICPs. We took a stock take of existing relevant publications by other standard setting bodies. We did an information gathering exercise amongst our members, and we had direct engagement with operational resilience experts and stakeholders. With regard to the ICP review, the ICPs have clear interactions with operational resilience and support the sound management of insurance operational risks. But that being said, by design, the ICPs are set out as a principle-based level and thus do not contain specific detailed guidance with respect to defining operational resilience and related terms and/or managing operational risks. The review of ICPs did reveal a number of examples of areas where further discussions or considerations for developing supporting material could advance the sound supervision of cyber resilience, IT third-party outsourcing, and business continuity management as critical elements of operational risk management, which we will touch on during the presentation. Next slide, and I will hand it over to my Vice Chair, Lizzie Gilbert.
Thank you very much. So yes, the next part of the presentation will outline a number of overarching issues for insurance supervisors, as outlined in the paper, relating to significant and increasing areas of operational risk. We're also going to try and weave in some of the lessons learned during the pandemic, touch on some supervisory approaches underway in different jurisdictions to address these risks, and flag various topics that might benefit from future consideration or further analysis by the IAIS and insurance supervisors. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So yeah, to start with governance and board accountability. One aspect the IAIS ICPs do emphasize, which can translate to operational resilience, is the importance of robust governance structures that enable insurers to identify and respond to emerging risks and adapt to changing environments. An insurer's board and senior management are well placed to oversee the establishment of a governance framework that can address the impact of operational disruptions and ensure that appropriate mitigation strategies are in place to manage their impact. External outreach undertaken to support the paper indicated that insurers with strong and effective governance frameworks were better placed to prevent, adapt, and respond to operational disruptions presented by the pandemic. We also found that many supervisory authorities do already seek assurances that insurers have sound governance frameworks and adequate board and senior management oversight over resilience measures, as well as strategies to mitigate risks associated with operational disruption. Next slide, please. Another important input for insurance supervisors when devising an effective supervisory strategy with respect to operational resilience oversight is having access to a range of information, including on an entity's operational resilience framework and the potential threats impacting the insurance sector. Effective information sharing among insurance supervisors and across the insurance sector more broadly may also help to strengthen the supervisory oversight and insurer management of operational resilience. We note that cyber threats, for example, have evolved, and attacks now frequently span multiple jurisdictions, sectors, and industries, with implications for the operational resilience of insurers. In some jurisdictions, regular forums for timely and constant exchanges of information on operational resilience have been put in place, and a number of examples are included in the paper. In addition, some authorities require insurers to disclose publicly or report to their supervisor directly updates on matters impacting their operational resilience. Though the benefits of information sharing on operational resilience among insurance supervisory authorities within the sector and among authorities and insurers themselves are well known, such initiatives nevertheless appear to be limited at present. Next slide, please. So turning to cyber resilience. So here we found that the insurance sector is heavily dependent on the use of digital technologies, and this reliance has only accelerated during the pandemic as entities transitioned to remote working. Many jurisdictions saw significant growth in the use of sophisticated and aggressive ransomware attacks during COVID-19. This has in turn increased the focus on entities having in place sound cyber resilience frameworks that can withstand and react to increasing cyber risks. A key issue for supervisors is how to gain assurance in a proportionate and resource-effective way that an insurer's cyber resilience framework is effective and robust. A particular challenge is that because cyber risks are continually evolving and growing, the forward-looking implications of potential threats to an entity's, or indeed the whole sector's, cyber resilience are difficult to quantify in a structured manner. And as such, widely standardized, agreed, and forward-looking metrics are not fully developed. Next slide, please. So here, the issues paper highlights 3 key challenges that supervisors face when assessing the quality of an entity's cyber resilience framework. These include whether they should undertake point-in-time assessments versus continuous monitoring. Some of the most commonly used supervisory techniques, such as forms of testing and audit, provide a really valuable snapshot of an insurer's cyber resilience framework at a particular point in time. However, a key challenge for supervisors is to identify the most effective supervisory tools and approaches to cyber resilience monitoring that can keep pace with both the changing nature of cyber attacks and the speed with which entities are adopting new technologies. There's also a lack of standardized metrics. A consistent and indeed standardized approach to assess an insurer's cyber resilience could be helpful, particularly when insurers are engaging third-party service providers that operate cross jurisdictions. Although limited, where quantitative metrics do currently exist, authorities did note that they can be helpful in assessing parts of an insurer's cyber resilience framework. For example, in assisting supervisors in their understanding of the inherent and residual risk maturity of risk management frameworks, as well as the identification of potential concentration risk. And then finally, resourcing cyber expertise. Supervisory authorities face challenges to developing cyber resilience oversight programs due to a skills gap. The skills required to assess cyber resilience are in high demand, and there are significant shortages of appropriately qualified staff. Supervisory authorities and insurers are competing for skilled staff and intensifying the difficulty for authorities to attract and retain specialists. One consequence of this skills shortage is that the advancements of supervisory frameworks over cyber resilience may lag behind the advancement of cyber attacks. Going forward, we considered that there may be value in future IAIS work focused on topics including sharing information on practices and developments in the insurance sector cyber incident reporting, or on metrics and tools used to evaluate the quality of an insurer's cyber resilience framework and emerging cyber risks. Developing proactive, consistent, and proportionate approaches to the development and implementation of an insurer's cyber resilience framework may also be worth investigating. Next slide, please. So yeah, here we'll cover the section related to IT third-party outsourcing. So the issues paper set out that the benefits of using third-party services include faster innovation, improved customer outcomes, reduced costs, scalability, and improved operational resilience. It was noted, for example, that during the pandemic, the ability to transition to remote working in an effective and timely manner was in many instances enabled by IT service providers. However, reliance on third-party providers of critical and important IT services has become a major operational risk for many insurers. Many regulatory frameworks include specific requirements for financial institutions to manage the risks associated with the outsourcing of business processes or functions. However, an area where both supervisory requirements and financial institutions' risk management processes remain less advanced is the identification and management of concentration risks associated with the provision of critical IT services to firms by third-party and outsourced service providers. This can occur at the level of the insurance or wider financial services sector, or larger insurance legal entities or groups. The increasing complexity of the financial sector, in particular with respect to the use of technology, has itself increased third-party concentration risks over the past few years, including during the pandemic. Also evident over recent years is an increase in the use of non-regulated subcontractors and a growing dependence on complex supply chains to deliver critical services, and this has the potential to move risks outside the regulatory perimeter. The paper noted that existing financial supervisory frameworks have inherent limitations with respect to identifying and managing the potential systemic risks posed by third parties and outsourcers, in that a single entity has a limited visibility over services offered by the same third-party provider to multiple financial institutions across multiple jurisdictions. Many supervisory authorities require, or are planning to require, insurers to provide information on services outsourced to third parties, and certain jurisdictions are moving forward with legislation or guidance on third-party service providers. Some notable examples include the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act, and the UK, His Majesty's Treasury recently published a policy statement setting out intended legislative changes in this area. Such information collections could allow supervisory authorities to better identify concentration risks in the future. Going forward, there may be value in future IAIS work focused on topics including aligning to the extent possible reporting definitions and requirements for terms relevant to IT third-party outsourcing, such as critical services, outsourcing, or third parties, all varied terms, with the aim of improving international cooperation among supervisors in the identification of cross-border concentration risks. Another potential topic could be exchanging information on practices and methodologies used by supervisors, including on topics such as the implications of concentration risk on cyber resilience and business continuity management frameworks, as well as developing catalogues of third-party service providers. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Great. So the final subtopic considered in the paper, which I'll talk through briefly before handing back to Todd, is business continuity management, which is an important topic for the insurance sector. So the paper found that it's critical that insurers adopt sound management practices to ensure business continuity in the event of an operational incident to meet its commitments to its insurees and other partners. There are a number of key elements in the business continuity management process. Identification, the capability to identify major operational incidents, is a critical first step before an insurer can assess the impact and then implement necessary mitigation measures. Established policy and governance. A sound business continuity management framework includes an established business continuity policy with clear lines of responsibility and management processes. The paper identifies a number of challenges related to business continuity management that could benefit from further analysis or cooperation amongst supervisory authorities. These include the integration of business continuity management and risk management, the enhanced scope and testing of business continuity management frameworks, and business continuity management adaptations in the new normal, by which we mean revising business continuity plans to ensure that they may remain fit for purpose post-pandemic with a rise in remote and hybrid working. Thanks very much. I'll hand back to Todd now.
Thanks, Lizzie, and thanks for going through the bulk of the work that the team has accomplished over the last year and so. And so if we can move to the next slide. So the next two slides outline the feedback we received from stakeholders and how the IAIS could add value in this space going forward. In particular, respondents highlighted that this is an important topic for which the IAIS could continue to add value, given its mandate and global reach. And so respondents emphasized that we need to remain principle-based, which can provide a strong foundation for harmonization and reducing regulatory fragmentation where possible, while also not inhibiting the ability to adapt to individual jurisdiction specificities. You can move to the next slide, please. So here we set out the specific areas that were highlighted by respondents as a potential narrow scope areas that could benefit from attention. And not surprisingly, we see things like definitions, initiatives to help quantify and mitigate concentration risks, data concerns on data localization risks, and the benefits of cross-sector coordination, a lot of which highlights everything that Lizzie had just gone through. And on the last point, I note that there is a number of cross-sector initiatives underway at the Financial Stability Board level on cyber incident reporting and IT third-party outsourcing, both of which have the IAIS represented. Next slide, please. So that brings us to what we can expect from the ORTF next. Now that we have published the issues paper, we are turning our focus to discussing amongst ourselves how the ORTF's work could best evolve to support internal and external stakeholders. We are at an early stage in these discussions, and that will be an input to the IAIS's development of its next 5-year strategic plan, for which a stakeholder survey is scheduled to be launched soon. What I can say at this stage is that the feedback we received from stakeholders is an important input for us, as is consideration of the work already being done on a cross-sector basis. Given the IAIS's global reach, I can say that I tend to think about how we can best help the insurance sector, and in particular, insurance supervisors who are facing similar challenges in this space, especially given the challenges around the pace at which the risks to operational resilience continue to evolve. And I will stop here. I want to thank you to everyone that has joined us so far, and I hope this has given you insights into the work undertaken by the IAIS on operational resilience thus far. I want to thank my vice chair for all of the support and work that is being done, and of course, the IAIS Secretariat for their continued leadership and support in this space. And so now we'd like to turn it over to questions, and Ruby.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Lizzie. I hope that gave everybody a good overview of both the structure, the approach that we took to developing the issues paper, as well as the core content. We're now left a little bit more than half the time for questions. And if you do have any questions, you can either raise your hand and we can turn it over to you, or you can pop your question into the chat box. And also, just to start, we've received a few questions on whether the presentation slides will be made available to all participants. These will be made available on our website, as well as a recording of this webinar following this session. I'll have a look at see if there are any raised hands. I'm not seeing any. Oh, we do have one, David Snyder. David, would you like to ask a question? Please go ahead. David, can you hear us?
There we go. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for your work and your steps going forward with significant stakeholder engagement. That's much appreciated, because these are issues where cooperation between supervisors and stakeholders is critically important. So thank you for your approach going forward. Two quick things. I think it's important that with regard to governance, that it be integrated in current ERM and governance ICP, so we don't have sort of multiple sort of layers of control, but rather they be integrated into the fundamental ERM process in the companies. And secondly, much appreciate the focus on proportionality. We represent 1,200 insurance companies of varying sizes and business models, so proportionality is always a very critical consideration. And sort of keeping in mind that the industry right now is facing a lot of headwinds in terms of inflation and other factors. So to the extent that we can use existing structures and processes in a way that suits whatever the emerging risks are. I think that's preferred, as well as for our international companies, some degree of international standardization. So just a few comments, and thank you for your work, and we look forward to participating actively in the future.
Thanks, David, as always. If I just might add, I think, the group that worked on this and the ORTF in general, has looked at the ICPs, and it was one of the first steps we did because we thought it was important to identify in the current framework, how can insurers of all sizes adopt and adapt to operational risk and resilience by conforming to those principles of corporate governance and having an ERM framework in place. And so, one of the things that we continue to talk about and discuss amongst ourselves is, is there anything that we can add value to in framing those up to assist insurance regulators and thus insurance providers to continue to support those principles within the framework that's there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, David. We do have a few questions in the chat. I'll start with a question from Vikesh Mistry. Is there an intention to publish some sort of paper similar to the BIS paper on operational resilience? Todd, would you like me to start?
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks.
So thank you for this question. We are in the early days of thinking about how we can move forward as a task force. Really thinking about how we can help supervisors as well as the insurance sector in this space. As I mentioned at the start, the IAIS is developing its next 5-year strategic plan. And in doing so, it looks at its strategic themes and whether or not those remain relevant. So its current strategic plan includes operational resilience or cyber resilience as a key strategic theme, and discussions are ongoing as to how that could evolve. So it's early days. It's difficult to say exactly how we would move forward, but I could say I guess at this juncture that operational resilience is a key challenge that we do continue to discuss as supervisors. I don't know, Todd and Lizzie, if you want to add more flavor to that from your perspective, from your organizations.
I think that covers it well from my end.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
We have another question from Itsuki Fukasawa. Whether or how this paper would be treating any relationship with our connectedness with recovery and resolution planning. So I take that as interactions between our paper and recovery and resolution planning. Who would like to start?
I can kick off perhaps, but I'm very interested in what Todd has to say on this. So it's a great question. And I think it points to something about operational resilience as a topic, which is that it touches on so many areas, and there's so many possible connections that you can draw with it across a whole different range of policy and supervisory topics. Now, recovery and resolution planning is not something that in the issues paper we actually made a direct connection between, if my memory serves me correctly. And I think part of the reason for that was because within the confines of the issues paper, it's a relatively, it's a reasonably long document, but it has to cover a lot of ground, particularly with such sort of three large subtopics. From my own personal perspective, and not speaking sort of as on how the group tackled this issue, because I think there was just too many other areas for us to get into it. I do think that there's an awful lot that can be learned from operational resilience and recovery and resolution planning. And there's actually, I think my experience from the UK's perspective has been that there are actually ways that firms can streamline their processes so that in some instances, really effective business continuity management and business continuity planning can also helpfully contribute to effective resolution and recovery planning at the same time, although there are, of course, important differences. But yes, it's a huge topic, and I think it would be a very rich one to explore potentially at a future date. So thank you for raising it.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. And I would just add, because of what I call the extent of the umbrella of operational resilience being as broad as it is, the difficulty that we had is refining our scope to something that's meaningful within a particular issues paper, but also understanding there are a lot of other interactions that have tentacles into operational resilience. And it's one of the reasons why we continue to invite stakeholder engagement. The ORTF is made up of many experts within this space, but we also understand that we don't know everything. And hearing from stakeholders and other individuals and other standard setting bodies is very much helpful in refining our focus so that we can highlight some of the top risks for insurance supervisors and the insurance providers within this space. And so I invite, if there are further questions or even additional context around that paper on connectedness with resolution, recovery and resolution planning, please contact the Secretariat. We are always looking to invite comments and questions.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Lizzie. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any other raised hands. Just check the chat. I'm not seeing any other questions. So maybe just as final, final words, just to thank everyone for joining us today, and for those of you that were involved in the process for commenting to our issues paper during the consultation phase. Thank you very much. We very much appreciate your input. There was quite a bit of focus on next steps and how the work of the IAIS could evolve in this space, and we found all of your feedback very useful as we now move through thinking about where we can focus our attention. So thank you. As Todd mentioned, if you do have any other questions or comments that you'd like to raise, please feel free to contact the IAIS Secretariat, and I'll be able to connect with you on those. Todd and Lizzie, any final remarks? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And as I said, the presentation, sorry, Lizzie.
No, just to say thank you to everyone who attended. That was all, and to you, Ruby, and the other Secretariat for your support with the event.
Same here.
Thank you. A recording of the event will be available on our website, as will the presentation slides. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.